I think there's a huge developmental stage that Indian MMA has been through, where Indian MMA is today and where it was in 1998 or 2000 or 2001 is definitely a huge change. It's a huge improvement, a lot of development. But on the larger scale, we're still a toddler. I mean, if during those early days, if we were just an infant, now we're a toddler. I think there's still so much more for Indian MMA to develop into, to grow into, but I think we're a lot better than where we originally were. And I wouldn't judge those early years, but I'll just say this is all part of the process. There's some things that you just cannot mess with. There's some things that you just cannot change. And when you put a sport or an entity through a process, it's going to take its own time. It's going to do what it needs to do. And Indian MMA is working in the right direction. It had a few hiccups here and there, but I think we're working in the right direction. One of the important things I would feel is that there's a lot more awareness. There's a lot more awareness among the fighters. There's a lot more awareness among the audience. Even like 10 years ago, a lot of fighters were getting into MMA not even knowing the rules. They'll just show up and say, I'm here to fight. What are the rules that we're fighting by? And we'll say, you can do this and you can't do this. Today they're a lot more prepared. They have a fight camp, they have a gym. Back in the day it was just Tiger's gym and fighting other martial arts gyms. But today it's different MMA gyms. I'm so proud to see that. It's different jiu-jitsu gyms. It's great to see that the audience is actually engaging with individual fighters, because I feel that the sport is only going to grow if you have the right fighters. And I think right now we're almost there. We're almost there where we have a lot more better fighters who can be great ambassadors for the sport, talking about it in a positive or negative light, which is all good. And then at the end of the day, we're still working in the right direction. We're still getting all the right visibility. We're getting the right people involved. And with everything that's happening with MMA internationally, especially with the UFC, that's all reflecting back to India, because the Indian audience always likes to depend on the Western world for its influence and for its advice, in a way. And so everything that's happening in the UFC, the Indian audience wants to see some of that coming out from Indian MMA fighters. Before it was, we have good fighters, but they can't talk. Now we have good fighters, they can talk. They can trash talk. They can call out each other, And so we're moving in the right direction. I'm really glad. I'm so proud. I am really so proud to see where Indian MMA is. And I'm just so excited for everything and every direction that Indian MMA is going to go towards. Talking about Matrix Fight Night, I think it's a fantastic platform. And it's pretty self-explanatory, because you have the fighters themselves talking about the promotion. A few months ago, some fighters had some bad experiences with some promotions. They had some bad experiences with their agents and so on and so forth. And then you have some of these same fighters at this show saying, hey, this is really good. And it's all on record, so they can't go back and say, no, that was crap before. So I'm glad that people are actually coming out and saying exactly how they feel. They're being treated the right way. And I think everybody is growing. The promoters are growing. The production teams are growing. The fighters are growing. The audience is growing. Everybody's growing in that right direction, with the right tools and the right influence. And here's where we are. 2019, June 29th, fireworks, Matrix Fight Night 2. For some reason, usually it's the professional fighters that get all of the coverages. They get the insurance, they get the good hotels, they get the medical teams and everything else. But it's usually the amateur fighters that would not see any of this. And sometimes that would be a bit of a negative towards Indian MMA, because an amateur fighter would get his first experience not getting all of these coverages, and that sometimes might discourage some fighters to enter in, because they know that they have to go through that process of being an amateur fighter to become a professional. And so sometimes I'd see fighters who want to stay within their own combat sports like Wushu Sanda or wrestling or boxing and kickboxing, and then build themselves in that spectrum before they move directly and make a jump to professional MMA. But what MFN is doing, is really a great incentive for the amateur MMA scene, because they're getting pretty much everything that the professionals are getting, except the money, So professional fighters do this for a living, so they're getting paid to fight. Amateur fighters, they're still building their their career, they're still building their experience and expertise within the sport. So they're obviously not getting paid, but they're getting all the other coverages. The amateur fighters are getting really good medical coverages. They're getting this great platform. They're pretty much on the same platform as the professionals on Matrix Fight Night, but they're not just professionals as yet. So I think it's really good to introduce the amateur fighters to the glamour, the big lights, all that production and all the glamour of the sport, the hype of the sport. Because sometimes, even if a fighter gets a really good experience as an amateur, the big lights and the hype hits him and he kind of crumbles under the pressure. But with the amateurs entering into all of the hype and the glamour of professional MMA by still being an amateur, I think this is a great experience that a lot many other promoters in different parts of the world don't do, and I think that they can learn from what Indian MMA is doing. So I think it's a good example that Matrix Fight Night is setting for international MMA, and hopefully the international critical audience can for once stop and say, hey, good job Indian MMA. So I would say, apart from being a martial artist, I'm 100% vested into being a fan of the sport. And I love following everything that's going on all across the world. I love everything that's going on with Indian MMA. I'm so excited when, somebody who I don't know, somebody who I haven't been following, suddenly comes up and says, hey, he won this fight in Thailand, or he won a jiu-jitsu medal in the Philippines or Abu Dhabi. I'm so excited that all of this is happening with the sport of Indian MMA, and I think this all contributes towards the growth. I might be a fan of some of the things that happen with international MMA, and I might not. I'm definitely a fan of, the hype and the promotion behind fights, but I think sometimes some of these things could set a negative impact on up-and-coming fighters. Some of the things that some international fighters might do could have a negative impact on new Indian fighters and make them think that that's okay. So I think the narrative is good. I think the idea is good to try and get more eyeballs, but I just feel that the international UFC promoters and fighters, I think, should to understand that they need to be a little more responsible because the whole world is watching, and everything that they do is going to reflect on the sport and their promotion and martial arts, in general. And I think martial arts is always about, discipline and respect. And of course, it's a warrior theme. We're fighting, we're not dancing, we're not getting to the cage to dance, but we are fighting, and it all has to be within discipline and respect. And I know that, tempers flare and things happen and, emotion gets involved, but I think it's so important for us to always retain, that we're martial artists. With Indian MMA, I think it's good. I think with Indian MMA, the Indian MMA fighters understanding that this is how you sell yourselves. I think they're slowly starting to understand, because initially it was, if someone challenged somebody, they'd want to go beat him up on the street. They want to show up at his gym and beat him up, saying, "Oh, that guy challenged me. Who does he think he is?" Now they understand that it's not something that's going to spill out outside of the cage. It might not necessarily spill outside of the event and the platform. They understand that this is all part of somebody getting inside someone's head and trying to instigate him to lose his game plan and go aggressive, go crazy, and that's when they're going to catch him. So they understand that this is all a mind game and tactics. So I think it's all good. It's definitely good for the sport. I'm so excited to see somebody like Srikanth, who he seems like he's like a philosopher, like a sage, like a MMA like an MMA guru, like a MMA sadhu. He seems like somebody he knows everything he's talking about. Everything he's saying makes sense, but he says it in such a calm way. But he still sounds like he's going to destroy you. So that's so cool that he brings that personality into Indian MMA. It's so cool to see Jason. He just doesn't run out of words, man. He does not run out of words. Everything he says, is always new. It's always fresh. It's so controversial. It makes people upset. And I think that's good. That's so good for the sport and for the promotion. I think all the other rivalries are still overshadowed by what's happening between Jason and Srikanth. Even Angad and Dhruv, they're still so respectful about each other. So I think maybe if something goes down in this fight, maybe, you know, I don't want to predict negative for anybody, but maybe if the result of this fight creates Angad versus Dhruv 3, maybe that might be something totally different, where their emotions and things that they say about each other. But I think all the other rivalries are still overshadowed by these two guys. These two guys are huge right now. I would confidently say, I would agree with you that this is the biggest Indian MMA fight till date. Jason versus Srikanth. When I moved to the United States, I had a vision to take everything that I had done in India to the next level. And everything that I had got to do with Tiger's Gym and Indian MMA and AIMMAA kind of reached, I would say, its pinnacle. You know, everything I did with Super Fight League, I think, kind of reached its pinnacle. And now there's a, you know, the sport has grown. There's so many more people involved. I think everything that everybody's doing in India is kind of building and, you know, moving in the right direction. And so, you know, I found this the right time for me to move to the US and set up everything that I'm doing now. And, you know, one of the brainchilds was GAMAF. And I found this really fantastic team of people, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, martial artists, financial consultants, people who are intelligent, people who are successful, people who are good at what they do in their own fields, but they have the same passion that I have for MMA. And so, you know, I found this really fantastic team. We're a 9-member board of people who believe that we can do something for professional MMA. And that's what GAMAF is about. The Global Authority for Mixed Martial Arts Federations is working towards regulating and sanctioning professional MMA, not just in the United States, but all across the world. And we're glad that we can be a part of everything that's happening with India. We're glad to be the international body sanctioning everything that's happening with India. And we're proud to be part of what Matrix Fight Night is doing.